Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. How's everybody doing today? We have officially been doing critter chats now for 4 weeks, which is kind of amazing to me, and something I'm pretty happy and proud of. So thank you for tuning in and for joining, whether you watch this live on Instagram or later on the full episodes are uploaded to YouTube or Facebook. I appreciate your support, I appreciate your viewership, and I appreciate being able to build this community of people who care about animals and want to learn a little bit more. So thank you. Today's Critter Chat is going to talk about a very dynamic group of animals called the lemurs. A while back I did an episode about primates in general, and we touched a little bit about the lemurs. But they certainly deserve a full episode dedicated to just them. And honestly, if I had more information, I would probably do full episodes of several of the species because they're really quite amazing. But my knowledge is limited, and so I'm going to kind of clump them all together, and we'll go from there. First of all, lemurs are a primate, so they're related to monkeys, apes, and us, as well as some other kind of more primitive primates that we talked about in that primate episode, including things like bush babies and lorises and such. Lemurs are only found in one place in the world. Well, one place plus kind of its neighbors, Madagascar, which is an island off of the southeast coast of Africa. It's about 250 miles off of the coast of Africa, and the lemurs have been there a very long time, according to scientists who have studied their evolution. And because of that, they've been isolated from the evolution going on in the rest of Africa, which is where they probably came from ancestrally. Sorry, I have a helicopter overhead, so I'm gonna just pause for a moment because I know that's kind of loud. So ancestrally, these lemurs came over from Africa onto Madagascar, and once they got to Madagascar, there were very few other animals there, and they were able to adapt to many different habitats and many different ecological niches or specialties in places where they lived in very unique environments. Now, a little bit about Madagascar itself. It's a very large island. It's the 4th largest island on the planet of things that they consider islands. Australia doesn't count. They consider that a continent because it's so big. So the 3 islands that are bigger are Greenland, Borneo, and New Guinea. So Madagascar is the 4th largest island, and it's just slightly smaller than the state of Texas. So it's quite a big chunk of land. Throughout that island, there's a lot of different habitats, and because of where it's located globally, it's usually pretty warm, and so a lot of it used to be tropical forest and rainforest, with also a big section of it that's kind of desert or desert-like that gets a lot less rain because of the mountains. There's a good mountain range that kind of runs through the middle of the island. Most of that is kind of a plateau. That's where a lot of the people kind of live today. And speaking of people, there's about 26 million people that live on this island. So although it's an island, it's a good sized island and has a lot of people that live there. Now the lemurs who live there, that's kind of a strange word. It doesn't really sound much like any other words out there. But it comes from a Latin word. Latin, again, was the language that they spoke in ancient Rome, and it's used by the scientific community today to describe a lot of different science things, especially in biology or the study of live sciences. But the word lemur comes from the Latin word for ghosts. And I always thought that this was kind of a fun story and kind of interesting, and I gained a much greater appreciation of why they would call these animals ghosts when I worked at the Phoenix Zoo, especially if I was there late at night, which often happened as I did special events at the zoo for 5 years there. and I was often there late at night and sometimes one of only a handful of people at the zoo. And when the lemurs would make some very strange sounds at the zoo, it was very creepy and haunting. And so I get the ghost reference very much so. Specifically, the species that sound very much like ghosts to me, and the kind that we had at the Phoenix Zoo, are the ruffed lemurs. If you saw the photo I posted earlier today on Instagram and Facebook, that is me meeting those lemurs. I was in education at that time, and the lemurs lived on an island, so we never got to go too close to them. But I had a special opportunity to work alongside the keeper one day and go out to the island and meet the red ruffed lemur. And the lemur in that photo with me is a very sweet, sweet lemur. He was the dad of his family, and his name is Comet, and he was absolutely amazing. But Comet and his family made very crazy sounds during the night. I'll see if I can find some videos or audio clips to upload later that has some of the different lemur sounds, because it definitely helps you understand how scientists called them ghosts or lemur. Lemurs are only found on Madagascar and a few little islands just kind of north of there called the Comoro Islands. Scientists believe that those lemurs that live on the Comoro Islands were probably taken there by people, but since there was nothing else there that lived kind of that lifestyle, they adapted well and still live there. Although there's smaller species that live there and there's not very many of them. Those islands are quite small. Because lemurs are isolated to this one island, they are considered the most endangered group of mammals in the world. Again, this is an island about the size of Texas, maybe a bit, well, actually quite a bit smaller, but it's still way bigger than California. So it's kind of in that range between California size and Texas size. And there's a lot of people that live there, which we'll get into later of why lemurs are endangered. For lemurs, they divided the whole big group of lemurs into 5 different families of lemurs and 15 different genuses or genera of lemurs, and over 105 different species of lemurs have been identified. And a lot of those have been fairly recent, as they've kind of done more DNA testing and genetic testing on some of the real secretive lemurs and some of the real little lemurs. Speaking of size of lemurs, the smallest lemurs are called mouse lemurs, and there's a type of mouse lemur that is called the Madame Bertha's mouse lemur, and it is only about 3 inches long with a 5-inch tail, so its tail is actually bigger than the body of the little lemur, and it only weighs 1 ounce, so it's pretty little, and it looks kind of like a little mouse. That's why they're called mouse lemurs. So that's the smallest one. The largest one that's still living is called the Indri, and Indris are really cool. I'm super fascinated about them. Although I've never seen Indris, I probably would need to go to Madagascar to do that. I don't know of any in any zoos worldwide. But Indris can be about 15 to 22 pounds and are about 35 to 36 inches long, so they're pretty good size. And they have a wee little stubby tail. So most lemurs have a pretty pronounced tail. Indris are an exception. Now, there used to be some bigger lemurs, and it wasn't all that long ago that those disappeared. People started living regularly on Madagascar only about 2,000 years ago, and most scientists believe that these bigger species, and some of these species that have recently gone extinct, lived there up until about 500 years ago. And when I say big, the biggest one weighed over 400 pounds. That's roughly the size of a gorilla, a male gorilla, a big gorilla. But that species is extinct today. Since people moved to Madagascar about 2,000 years ago, 17 different species of lemurs have gone extinct. And there's some good reasons for that. Again, it's an island. A lot of people live there, but it gets a little more complicated. We'll get into that in a minute. With lemurs, although they are primates, so they're kind of like a monkey or an ape or like us, but they're a bit more primitive. And so that means that their shape is a bit different, the way they live is a bit different, and they have some different senses that are a little stronger than what we have or that monkeys have. Because they kind of were the dominant mammal group on Madagascar, they filled in a lot of different ecological niches. So some are little tiny like the mouse lemurs, some are a little bit bigger like a squirrel, some are a bit bigger. Most of them are kind of in the most common ones that we know of are kind of cat to small dog size, and they typically live up in trees. You may be familiar with like a ring-tailed lemur that has a long gray, it's a gray body with kind of a black and light gray striped tail, really long tail. Some lemurs have been very famous in some movies, like the Madagascar movie, the cartoon. There's a lot of different lemurs shown in that, although that's not exactly scientifically correct movie. But yeah, there's a lot of different lemurs out there, a lot of different sizes and shapes. Most lemurs, the larger species, typically are more like a fox-like face. So they kind of have a pronounced muzzle or a snout and a wet nose. And that wet nose is kind of a good cue. If you've ever played with a dog and you've touched its nose, you know that that is also a wet nose. And that's also a very good clue to science that their nose or their sense of smell is very important. And that is very true, especially with the bigger lemur species. Now the smaller lemurs that are more like mouse and squirrel size, they kind of have a face that's a little more like that, a mouse or a squirrel. And the smaller ones typically are more active at night and are more likely to eat insects, some fruits, and some plants. Whereas the bigger ones are more active during the day, more social, and typically eat things like leaves, branches, roots, and fruit and flowers off of the different plants. But they live in a wide variety of habitats because Madagascar is an island with big mountains kind of in the middle. It has rainforest on the east and deserts and dry areas on the west and in the southwest particularly. There's lemurs that kind of fit all sorts of those environments, including a very specialized lemur called a marsh lemur that hops around in wetlands and lives on kind of like reeds, really tall grasses. I think I've seen a documentary that shows those, and they're pretty great. They're like a little tiny monkey that hops in between these reed grasses and picks off the new shoots to eat them. But many of these lemurs live in all these different places. So that ring-tailed lemur, the one with the big long striped tail, kind of like a raccoon tail, that one actually lives in like a desert setting. So that lives in the driest part of Madagascar, where the plants are kind of spiky like cactuses, and kind of more like succulent plants. Whereas some of the other lemurs live more in like a tropical rainforest setting, and up in some of the mountainous highland areas of the island. So most lemurs have big round eyes that are very bright, and forward-looking eyes. And they, like I said, they have a very wet nose, so they kind of rely more on their sense of smell than on their sense of vision. And that's different than the other primates. So monkeys and apes especially rely more on our vision, less on our nose. Lemurs usually have a soft fur coating, and that fur is usually either white, gray, black, brown, or a reddish brown in color. Some of them have different colors between the males and the females, where the males are all like black and the females may be a lighter color. One special species of lemur is called the blue-eyed black lemur, and I've actually worked with them a bit at the Los Angeles Zoo when I worked there, and they're really cool because they are the only primates other than humans that have blue eyes. So of all the many hundreds of species of primates, only humans and the blue-eyed black lemur have blue eyes. So I think that's pretty cool. And the blue-eyed black lemurs also come in different colors. So the males are black and the females are kind of a lighter brownish red color. Most lemurs kind of have a soft fur. An exception to that would be the aye-aye, whose fur looks quite different. We'll talk about aye-ayes a little more in a moment. What else were we going to say? Oh, the daytime species. So some species are active at daytime or diurnal. They are more social. They usually live in like a family group or a troop, and they are led by a dominant female. She's the boss. Everybody listens to her. She's in charge. So she decides when the group moves, where the group's going to go look for food, where the group's going to sleep or rest, and how the group stays together. She's the boss. They all respect and get that. And she's a very good group leader for her troop. Most of the nighttime, and the daytime lemurs also have a lot of different vocalizations. So they're a little more vocal in the sounds they make to communicate with each other. And so that would be also those lemurs that kind of help give them that name lemur, which again means ghost. Some of those sounds that they make are specifically alarm calls to kind of warn about predators or danger. They also have kind of a hey, where are you kind of call as they spread out throughout the forest to gather their food. They can easily become separated because they're in all these trees. And it may be tough to see each other, but when one of them makes that hey, where are you call, each of the other lemurs will answer, and that way they can know where everybody in the group is and helps them to stay together. Now there's also lemurs that are more active at night, the nocturnal lemurs. And most of these are solitary or live alone, and they're typically the ones that eat more bugs and other things, and they're typically smaller, with a big exception. And that exception, if you've ever heard of it, is called an eye. I remember seeing a photo of an eye when I was a little kid, and I was terrified because they're a little scary looking. And I thought it was like a little monster or like a gremlin or something from a movie. And when I found out that it was a real animal, it scared me even more. So I was kind of scared and terrified of this creature called an eye. And then I learned that it was a lemur, and that was explained to me that it's kind of like a little monkey. And I thought, oh, well, then they're small. I won't be scared of it. And that helped me overcome my fear. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I ever saw an eye in a zoo. And I believe that was the zoo in Columbus, Ohio, where I first saw an eye. And I was blown away by how big they are. Not that they're huge, they're about this size. So they're about the size of a big house cat or a small to medium sized dog. But I was really surprised they were as big as they were, because I was expecting something like this, and it's something like this. Now, eyes are very exceptional nighttime hunters, and they are hunting usually insects or grubs and little worms. And a lot of those, they live up in the trees. And so the eye is very good at moving through the trees very quietly at night. And the eye has huge ears, and it uses its huge ears to listen for the bugs. And specifically for some of the little worms that live inside the trees that are underneath the tree bark and that are kind of eating the different trees. The eye will listen to where they are and get really close to the tree. And then it also has a very specialized finger, and it's its middle finger, and it will use that to kind of tap along the trees to figure out where the bug is. And it also has a pretty sharp nail, and it can use that nail or its very sharp teeth to break into the bark of the tree to get those bugs out. So it's kind of a very unique hunting strategy where it listens and then it taps with its finger to like locate exactly where the bug is, and then it rips open the tree with its teeth and its sharp nails to get the bug. So very specialized, very unique animal, the eye. Some of the other lemurs that you may be familiar with, there's a lemur called a shafak. I believe there was a very famous shafak that was on some TV shows called Zabumafu, and shafaks have a very strange way of moving. They kind of dance, and so between trees or branches when they're jumping, they kind of are standing like a human stands, kind of on their back legs, and they have these little arms, and they kind of hop on the ground, and they can jump from tree to tree about 20 to 25 feet which is pretty impressive. They're only about maybe 24 to 30 inches big. And they're super, super cute. I worked with Shafox at the LA Zoo, and I really loved them. But their ability to move and the way they move is incredibly adorable, and especially if they're on the ground, they kind of run like this sideways. So they kind of don't move very good on the ground, but it's really cute and kind of funny to watch. Back to the ring-tailed lemurs with those long stripy tails, kind of like a raccoon-looking tail. They do some very unusual communication with their tails, and they're one of the few lemurs that does any sort of body positioning or non-verbal communications. They also do scent markings, so the males in particular have a scent gland on their wrist, and they kind of will rub that together and then pull their tail back between or forward through their legs and rub the scent gland on their tail. And then that smell is on their tail, and they'll have what primatologists call stink fights. So they get this tail all nice and stinky from these scent glands, and then they'll kind of swing their tail in front of other lemurs' faces. And kind of the stinkiest tailed lemur is the one who wins the little fight. So it's a very odd behavior, but it's kind of entertaining to think about. That's the ring-tailed lemurs. And those are probably the most common lemur that you may see in a zoo setting. They've done very well in zoos, and they were one of the first species to kind of come to the United States. The San Diego Zoo was the first zoo to really bring lemurs over to the United States back in the 1960s. And they were the first zoo in the world to breed multiple species of lemurs. And many of those lemurs that are in the US now can trace their ancestry back to being born at the San Diego Zoo. What else were we going to talk about on here? Pretty much every species of lemur is listed as either vulnerable or endangered or critically endangered. That's pretty sad. That's also why this group of mammals is very highly studied and is of significant concern to conservationists to try to do some good things in hopes that we can save this big group of animals that is so unique. And the reasons why they are vulnerable to extinction is because, again, they live on an island with 26 million people. And that island and the people who live there are kind of a poorer country. And so as a country, they've had a hard time putting in place strict laws to protect their forest and their land. And they've often cut down many of their forest because a lot of the wood, the trees that grew there are the kind of trees that a lot of people like to use to make things out of because they're very beautiful. They're very tropical hardwood trees. And so many of the forests have been cut down to supply the world with lumber. And Madagascar felt that that was a good way for their economy to kind of earn some money from the rest of the world, is to sell these trees. They also have 26 million people to try to feed. And so a lot of the forest got cut down to start growing crops, particularly growing things like rice, takes up a lot of land. And it's a good way to feed a lot of people, but it does take a lot of land. And if you're cutting down the forest to grow it, it's very rare that the forest would be able to come back under the conditions you're growing the rice in. So habitat loss is the biggest reason that lemurs are endangered or threatened. And their other big reason is hunting. Sometimes the people, especially in some of the smaller villages and people who are very poor, are just trying to find food. And so they sometimes will hunt lemurs for food. They will also sometimes go after lemurs if they're trying to grow things like fruit and the lemurs are coming and eating the fruit. They may not like that or not be very happy to have lemurs around, and they will often try to hunt lemurs. So there are several conservation organizations that are trying to do some really good work to kind of help mitigate or change the way that that happens. And they're trying to help the people of Madagascar, and especially the government of Madagascar, to understand the benefits of ecotourism. So having tourists come and visit places where lemurs live in the wild could be a very big financially beneficial way for Madagascar to kind of protect some of its species. That has definitely worked in other places. There are many people who go to China every year to see giant pandas. There are many people who go to Africa every year to see things like elephants and rhinos. So it could definitely happen for Madagascar, as they are the only place with wild lemurs. So there are many people trying to convince the government of Madagascar to do that. One of those groups is our special shout out today. They are called the Duke Lemur Center. And if you've ever heard of Duke, Duke is a big university in North Carolina. And one of the things that they are very passionate about is saving the lemurs. And so they've created this amazing place where, as part of their education and their research that they do as a university, they have a bunch of lemurs. They have over 200 individual lemur individuals, and they have I forget how many species they currently had. I looked it up earlier. I think it's like 15 or 16 species, and that's the largest concentration of lemurs outside of Madagascar anywhere in the world. So Duke Lemur Center has done a lot of really great research, and they're continuing to learn more and more about lemurs and ways that we can collectively work to protect and save them. There are also very many zoos that have done a really good job of breeding lemurs. I was able to work a little bit with lemurs at the Phoenix Zoo as an educator and special event planner. I would help create awareness events that helped raise a lot of awareness and help people understand what lemurs were and why they are important. And also as a zookeeper, and when I was training to be a zookeeper and I helped prepare food at the LA Zoo, I worked with the lemurs a bit there. I've also seen lemurs at a lot of different zoos, and I've been really impressed with learning more about them. And with 105 species out there, there's still a lot of lemurs I need to learn more about. Two places where I've really enjoyed seeing lemurs, well, one place that I've been to and one place is new, I haven't yet. But at the San Diego Safari Park in Escondido, California, they now have a walk-through exhibit with some lemurs where you can walk in and be in the same space as lemurs. I have not been there since that exhibit opened, but it is on my list of places to go when we can travel a little more again. I hope to be able to go visit there and see that. I have been to a very similar exhibit in Berlin, in Germany, at the zoo there, where you could walk through this little forest that had a big net over the top of it, and there were lemurs that were roaming free inside this exhibit with people walking on the path. And the lemurs would come quite close to you, and it was quite an amazing experience to be that close to these adorable creatures. So I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you about lemurs today. Again, this full episode will be uploaded later today on the Zoo Nerd Facebook profile and the Zoo Nerd YouTube channel. So check those out if you've missed part of this, or if you've missed any of the other critter chats and want to go back. Also, feel free to like, share, subscribe, and follow the Zoo Nerd profile on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. I upload new content every day, and I enjoy sharing what I've learned about animals and helping raise more awareness about them and helping other people learn about animals. So thank you for tuning in, and until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.